G'day legends, as we all know there was no UFC this weekend, but we still found ways to entertain ourselves on this channel with all the recent conversations that have been going on lately about the GOAT list. Can Islam Makhachev make it into the top 5 in the GOAT list? Where does Alexander Volkanovski belong in the GOAT list? I went back and with the people on this channel, us and the live stream, rewatched Anderson Silva's entire career. And I did that because your boy Lucas Tracy, he recently made a video where he went through every single one of the champions in the UFC right now, and he said, what do they need to do to become the GOAT? And, as course, Lucas Tracy overglazes people too much. He gives them far too much credit. But one of them that really got to us was Dricus du Plessis. And according to Lucas Tracy, all Dricus du Plessis has to do is beat Khamzat Chimaev. And he becomes the greatest middleweight of all time. Now, I'm not going to go through Anderson Silva's entire career here in this video and break down all the reasons why Anderson Silva is far ahead on the GOAT list, especially when it comes to the middleweights, above Dricus du Plessis, especially more than just one win of Khamzat Chimaev. But I thought what would be fun to do is take Anderson Silva's career and try and blueprint map it onto Dricus du Plessis' career. And what are some equivalent things that Dricus du Plessis could realistically do to get himself close to the conversation to be able to compare himself with Anderson Silva? And that is what we're going to be doing in this video. Look, let's jump straight into it. This is Lucas Tracy's little slide here, pulled straight from his video. Dricus du Plessis, how can Dricus du Plessis become the middleweight GOAT? And he says Dricus's resume is far better than Anderson Silva's resume. 10-0 in the UFC against way better competition compared to 17-1 Silva. Now look, I'm not going to pretend that every single person that Anderson Silva ever faced was the elite of the elite. There are some absolute nobodies in his run. Absolute nobodies and bums in his run. But look at some of the names that Lucas Tracy is pulling on here. I mean, he's got Darren Till there. Like, if you're going to put Darren Till as a legacy win for Dricus du Plessis, you can really start to look at some of Anderson Silva's wins. Like, I don't consider Darren Till a legacy win for Dricus du Plessis. I think Lucas considers Darren Till a legacy win for Dricus du Plessis because Lucas watched the sport when Darren Till was in it, and he didn't watch the sport when Anderson Silva was fighting, which is fair enough. I wasn't watching the sport when Anderson Silva was fighting either. But really, what is the height of Darren Till's career? Challenging for a UFC title? Okay. So if anyone that's ever challenged for a UFC title, are they all of a sudden considered legacy wins? And then, of course, he's got Derek Brunson as well. I mean, this is a Derek Brunson that he is putting on Dricus's list, and Lucas says this himself in the video, after Anderson Silva has already fought Derek Brunson and beaten him. So I think when you look at their careers side by side, and I'll just move myself out of the way here. I think when you look at their careers side by side, you can strike Darren Till off the list as a bit of a legacy win. I don't think he counts that much as a legacy win, right? That's like a Taylor's latest win for Anderson Silva. Just an absolute nobody, or a Travis Lutter sort of a win. Like, these are nobody wins. And then, of course, Derek Brunson as well. Like, they both beat Derek Brunson, so that 1-for-1. And this puts Dricus du Plessis, like, legacy-wise, behind Anderson Silva, right? Like, Anderson Silva, he came into the UFC as a... Have I done this properly? So Anderson Silva, there we go, now you can see his face. So Anderson Silva, he comes into the UFC, right? He comes into the UFC as a pound-for-pound world-class fighter already, right? Remember when Michael Chandler came into the UFC and he already had a bunch of legacy over from Bellator? All he had to do was fight Dan Hooker, bloody Dan Hooker, and then he could go and fight Charles Oliveira for the title, yeah? Or Kaiara Sakura very recently comes over from Ryzen, gets to fight for a title straight away. The reason I'm bringing this up is because Lucas Tracy likes to talk about how some of the guys in the past don't have the clout, they don't have the name value, they're not in such a high level of competition because they're not fighting in the UFC. When we still have that going on today. We have people who are not fighting in the UFC come over to the UFC, and within a couple of fights, they're fighting for a title straight away. It's a very similar thing. So Anderson Silva, he fights once in the UFC, fights for a title in his second fight because he's very similar to like a Michael Chandler, Kaiara Sakura. He's already coming into the UFC with a whole bunch of clout and name value. Again, I'm trying to compare Anderson Silva to the eyes of a modern fan. He unified the Pride belt and the UFC belts in his fight with Henderson. Yeah, he moved up to fight light heavyweight contenders just for fun. He took dangerous matches and he took dangerous rematches. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about is the Khamzat Chimaev win that Lucas Tracy wants to talk about. Listen, Khamzat Chimaev has got one win in the top 5, Robert Whittaker. That thus far is the peak of Khamzat Chimaev's career. You know, apart from that, yes, he has beaten the living piss out of Kevin Holland. Well done. He took Old Man Usman on 11 days notice to a draw. Well done. I am not saying this to bring down Khamzat Chimaev because I know the Khamzat Chimaev fanboys out there are going to start raging. I'm just saying, here we are again, Lucas Tracy is talking about all these other guys' credentials, and he's saying that Khamzat Chimaev is going to be Dricus du Plessis' best win. What are Khamzat Chimaev's credentials? What are his credentials? Yes, he has been dominant. Yes, he is the rightful number 1 contender. Yes, he is amazing, but his credentials are a top 5 win against Robert Whittaker and Kamaru Usman on 11 days notice and Kevin Holland. Yeah? But let's say Khamzat Chimaev is very similar to the Chael Sonnen fight that Anderson Silva found himself in, right? Chael Sonnen, up-and-coming wrestler, younger than Anderson Silva was. Stylistically bad matchup, yeah, on a run, on steroids. Anderson's on steroids too. But let's say it's similar. Well, Anderson fought Chael with an injured rib. And we know today that Dricus du Plessis isn't fighting Khamzat Chimaev unless he is 100% healthy. In fact, we know that Dricus doesn't fight unless he's 100% healthy because he was offered the title shot against Israel Adesanya and he turned it down because his body wasn't ready for the fight. He would rather go back to waiting in line, and he did go back to waiting in line. That's fine. Dricus is allowed to make those choices. But it just goes to show that comparative-wise, when we're talking about legacy and hype levels, Anderson Silva with a broken rib for a title fight or an injured rib for a title fight is willing to take on his version of Khamzat Chimaev. Dricus du Plessis isn't. But that's okay. Let's start building Dricus du Plessis some legacy here so we can actually get him on Anderson Silva's level. Well, if we're going to compare Khamzat Chimaev to Chael Sonnen, then he doesn't just have to beat Khamzat Chimaev once. He's got to beat Khamzat Chimaev twice. He's got to beat Chimaev twice. He's sort of got to fight Chimaev injured and then fight Chimaev again when he's healthy and beat him in the second round. You know what I mean? He's got to beat Khamzat Chimaev twice. Then you've also got the idea that Anderson Silva used to bounce between the weight classes for fun. He would go up and fight at light heavyweight. So during this process, maybe he beats Khamzat Chimaev once, and then after he beats Khamzat Chimaev, he moves up to the light heavyweight division. And Dricus du Plessis has to just KO Yuri Prohaska with one punch. That could start adding some very serious legacy to get him comparable to when Anderson Silva moved up to the light heavyweight division and KO'd people with one punch. And then let's say after Dricus du Plessis moves up to the light heavyweight division, KOs Yuri Prohaska with one punch, then he comes back down to the middleweight division, fights Khamzat Chimaev again, finishes Khamzat Chimaev in the second round this time. Then he's got to move back up to the light heavyweight division and maybe KO, say, Jamal Hill or Powhatan. Someone who had just fought for a title and just held a belt like Anderson did. That would be a similar levels of hype to what Anderson did. So he's got to fight Khamzat Chimaev, move up, fight Yuri, KO Yuri, move down, fight Khamzat Chimaev again, beat him, second round, move up, fight Jamal Hill and knock him out. Now we're starting to get to similar levels of hype compared to what Anderson Silva was doing back in his day. But then unfortunately for Dricus, it doesn't just stop there, you know, because now you've got the levels of hype of Dricus du Plessis beating a young up-and-coming wrestler who might be seen as better than him or stylistically bad matchup for him, and Dricus is taking that fight even when he's got injuries. And now you've got Dricus du Plessis bouncing around between the two weight classes like Anderson was doing just for the lulz. But then there's also this little bit of legacy there where Anderson Silva unified the Pride belts when he fought Hendo. Now, unfortunately, back in the day, Pride was seen as a more competitive organization for the UFC. And we don't have any organization these days that could be seen as more competitive to the UFC. But we do have the PFL. And as far as the PFL is dog shit, there is a world where in the next 2 or 3 years, the PFL goes completely bankrupt. So what Dricus would have to do is set up a fight with the PFL's middleweight champion, and I don't even think the PFL has a middleweight champion. So somehow, the PFL would have to go bankrupt, and then the PFL light heavyweight champion or the welterweight champion would have to come over to the UFC, step up and fight Dricus du Plessis, and Dricus du Plessis would have to unify the UFC and PFL belts. That could work as well. Or maybe unify the Ryzen belts. Maybe if someone from Ryzen comes over, you know, or maybe someone from kickboxing comes over with their belt. So unify the belts from another fighting organization as well while being a champion. That could add on a similar level of legacy to the level of legacy that Anderson Silva seemed to accrue for himself. And this still wouldn't get him to 17-1 the way Dricus. Like, we're not trying to match numbers for numbers here. We're just trying to match legacy-esque wins. But then after that as well, there would still be a little bit more for poor old Dricus du Plessis to do. Because see, after all of that is said and done, Anderson Silva is back down in his weight class, in there against Stephan Bonnar, just fucking around. Just having fun with the fight game. Standing with his back up against the cage, just ducking punches. Now, yes, we can talk about the skill level of Stephan Bonnar. That's absolutely fine. So I think to match that kind of level of arrogance, aura, absolute mastery of the cage, and just believing that you are levels above everybody else, Dricus du Plessis, after clearing out the division, should try and work in a fight with someone of like Jared Cannonier level. You know what I mean? Someone like Stephan Bonnar, who's been there, done that, challenged for a title. You know what I'm saying? That kind of level. And then just stand with his back to the cage and allow Jared Cannonier to just fucking tee off on his face for the absolute lols of it. Just for the absolute fun of it, to see what would happen and then end up winning that fight. But then, of course, that isn't where it ended. Because, unfortunately for Anderson Silva, he did the same thing against Chris Weidman, who, again, was a much younger up-and-comer in the UFC. So, not only would he have to do it against Jared Cannonier, but then, towards the end of his career, when Dricus du Plessis is about 37 years old, and he's been successful for many years at the highest level, where everyone is training and got their eyes on him just to defeat him, because as we know, when you're a champion in the UFC, every single training camp, people are picking you apart. You are the one that everyone in the division is hunting. So after being hunted for many years, maybe, he doesn't have to be as old as Anderson was. I'm sure Dricus isn't going to end up as old as Anderson was. But maybe, around 36, 37 years old, invite a young up-and-comer like Kyle Baralho into the cage and then do the same thing again and let Kyle Baralho just tee off on you. And you'll probably end up getting chipped. But this is, again, trying to take Anderson Silva's career and copy and paste it onto Dricus du Plessis' career. So if Dricus du Plessis can finish his career with getting 2 wins over Sean Strickland, a win over Israel Adesanya, a win over Robert Whittaker, a win over Darren Till, which is just an absolute nobody, the same as Anderson had some nobodies in there, the win over Derek Brunson, and Anderson Silva also the win over Derek Brunson, win over Khamzat Chimaev twice, beat Khamzat Chimaev twice. If he moves up to light heavyweight, KOs some of the big names up there for fun with one punch, moves back down to defend his title against another organization's title holder and unify the belts. And then when all of that is said and done, just to prove that he fucking can, invites some legend up from his division from the past and just stands with his back to the cage and lets them tee off on him. Then Lucas, at that point, I think it's fair enough to say that Dricus du Plessis can start to be compared to Anderson Silva. However, I do not think that getting a win over the rightful number 1 contender makes you the middleweight GOAT. I think that is a little bit too much. I'm sorry, Lucas. It was a very funny video. It was a hilarious video. It was a very, very good video. It was very, very enjoyable. But that take is a touch retarded. If this is your first time here, welcome. My name's Dougie. I make an MMA video every single day of the week, Monday through Friday, and I try and go live at least 3 times a week where we do all sorts of fun shit on the lives. If you want to check all of that out, hit that notification button down there and that subscription bell to know when I go live and to know when I make a new video. Let me know down there in the comments, what does Dricus du Plessis have to do to surpass Anderson Silva on the GOAT list? Is it just beat the rightful number 1 contender at the time, or Is there maybe a little bit more to the legacy that needs to get sprinkled on top as well? Let me know about that down there in the comments. If you're a paying member of the channel, thank you so much. I appreciate all of you. Your names are up on the next slide. And until then, I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.